Hey guys, welcome back to Zane Customs. In this week's episode, I'm going to be painting up a custom 3D printed sculpture that I call the Ivory Night. So this piece was printed in a few different parts, and you can see here I'm just kind of showing you how it all fits together. There's little pegs on the bottom of the head that will slot into the neck, and on the sides of his shoulders that slot into the chest, and different things like that. And they're also printed hollow, and you can see little holes across the different pieces, and that's so as they print, the resin can drain out. And that's just done to save time, and also this is a little bit of a heavier duty resin than some resins I've used in the past, so it should be plenty strong. And it also helps keep it a lot lighter. And you could also see there's a little peg on the top of his the thigh pieces that'll slot into the bottom of his torso, and basically just things that I had to keep in mind as I was sculpting the character so that it would be easy to assemble later. But for the most part, I'm not going to glue all these pieces together now. I'm going to try and paint as much as possible and then glue them together later. But there will be some parts that will need to be glued together now. For example, the sword blade. It was too long, so I had to split it into two pieces. So I'm going to glue that together, and also some thigh pieces. Then also you can see here is I ran out of this resin, so a few of these pieces are printed in blue. And for the most part that doesn't matter, because some of the pieces that are printed in blue would be like the skirt on the front and back, and those are just going to be painted, or they'll be primed and then painted red, so it doesn't matter. But with the legs I was a little worried, because the whole idea behind this sculpt was to print in this kind of yellow, or it's meant to be translucent, completely clear resin, but if you leave it in the sun too long, it'll yellow. And that's actually what I want, because when I did my video a couple months ago entitled Painting Up My Custom Alien Sculpture, I used this resin and then did a light coat of white primer on top of it, and it gave this really cool ivory looking effect that I really liked, and that's kind of the inspiration behind this whole sculpture and this whole statue and everything. So that's what I was going for. So I was a little nervous at this point that this wouldn't work well, because the resin that I had at that point was blue. So you'll see throughout the video that the difference between using the yellow and the blue resin. And here I'm just filing or sanding away at the different pegs and different pieces of the body to make sure it all slots together. Again, I had to cut this into quite a lot of different pieces. One, because my 3D printer is small and can't handle a statue this size, so I need to cut it up. And two, it also makes it easier when it comes to the painting stage, so I don't have to get into all these tiny little awkward to get areas. And in total there was actually 14 different pieces that were printed and then assembled. But a lot of them are small pieces, so some of them I could print multiple pieces at a time. And also, even if you design this as perfectly as possible, sometimes there's things that you just can't tell in the computer, in ZBrush, which is the program I use to sculpt all these. There are certain things you just can't tell that's going to be a problem until you print it out and you physically have it and you see. For example, the arms, they were a lot thicker than I was expecting them to be, and I had to file them down quite a bit to make them fit. That's kind of the process. This is the first time I've printed this character, and it'll help me in the future. If I ever print him again, I'll know the adjustments to make. And then here you can see I'm doing this primer coat that I kept talking about. So all the parts on the body that are going to be ivory, I'm just doing a super light pass on and calling it good there. Any of his fabric or cloth that's going to be black or red or anything, I'll do a couple more coats to build up the primer on there. But again, on the parts of his body that are supposed to be ivory, I really want that really light, almost dusting of white. It really helps sell the look of ivory, and having the translucent yellow underneath, really, it all just helps so well to make it look like ivory. Again, that is why I was a little nervous about the blue leg piece in the back, but it ended up looking alright. You can definitely tell a difference between the two, but it wasn't too bad. And hopefully now that I'm getting some coats of primer on there, you'll actually be able to tell a little bit of the detail in the sculpt a little bit more now, because that translucent yellow didn't show up on camera very well, so it was kind of hard to tell what was going on. And also, like I mentioned, when it comes to any other part of the body that's not ivory, I'll do multiple coats, and also on the blue. Even anything printed out of the blue that is meant to be ivory. I don't want any of that blue showing through. I'm just going to try and have to mimic the ivory color in some other way, so I just go ahead and prime those as much as I possibly can. And here you can start to see the difference. These are, you can still see a little bit of the blue underneath, so they need some more coats, but you can definitely see the difference between those and what's meant to be the yellow, the ivory. Here's what I'm talking about, where I was saying I'm gluing the sword together, and that's just because certain things will be easier to paint and then glue together later, and I designed them that way so that when you glue them together you don't really see any seams. But there's certain parts that weren't necessarily designed that way but had to be cut just because they wouldn't fit on my printer, and that would be the sword and the thigh pieces. And here, this is just some gap filler that I'm going in and trying to fill all the gaps I possibly can to make it look like it is one piece. Also want to mention, for any of you who have watched my past videos, seen the old one where I painted up my old alien sculpture, this should be a lot better quality. I borrowed my wife's DSLR camera. It's much better, but there's going to be a lot of points where it's out of focus, and that's just because I'm trying to learn the camera and didn't do the best job, but hopefully it gets better throughout the video. Alright, and right here, this is what's called a soft tone wash, and a wash is basically just paint that's super thinned out, so you paint it all over your statue or whatever part you want to get dirty and grimy. You let it dry for a minute, and then you wipe off the excess, and all that dirty brown color kind of stays in the cracks and the crevices and really makes it look a lot better. And a lot of times when I paint up my sculptures, you don't really see all the little details until you start to do stuff like this, or dry brushing, to really helps highlight all those cracks and different things going across the ivory. And again, this helps highlight a lot of the details of the statue and helps it pop on camera even more so than it did before. And once I did this and really started to like the way it was looking, then I just went for it full bore and started doing a light wash over the whole thing. And again, this is called soft tone, so it's not too dark. It's kind of a light brown tone that goes over the whole body. But after a while, I eventually will go in with a strong tone, which is more of a black. And I won't go over the whole body with that, but I'll try and stay in the shadows in different places, or if there's like a really big crack, then I'll try and use some more of the dark or the strong tone on that. But this soft tone isn't necessarily to bring out shadows or anything. Like, it helps imply that, but it's also to dirty it up and grimy it up and make it look even more so like the ivory that I painted in the computer. And one thing about this statue that was so nice was I could be kind of messy with it, because really the only colors happening here are the ivory, which just has these tones going over it, and then black and red. So I wasn't too worried about anything. If I got too much red somewhere, I can just cover it with black, and if I got it on top of the ivory, then you can just add a little bit of water and kind of scrub it off. And if you didn't do a clear coat in between, it'll actually scrub off pretty well. So that was really nice. And also when it comes to painting the red, you'll see it in a bit when I start painting the red on his forearms and different things. I didn't have to have a perfect line, because I could come in with my strong tone later to fill in those gaps between the red and the ivory and kind of hide any imperfect lines. But yeah, like I said, this is all ivory, black, and red. So here I am doing the black. And sorry again, like I mentioned, I'm kind of new to this camera and it's kind of hard to use, so sometimes I'm out of focus or out of frame. But anyways, yeah. So I kind of imagined him to have this thin black leather shirt and pants going underneath all the armor. So pretty much his whole undersuit is all black, and then the really red that you ever see is like his skirts, a little bit on his hood, and like mostly just highlight areas like that. Most of his basic suit is black, and then you'll see on here on the back of his calf here, there's a little flap coming off, and that'll be red. But like I said, it's mostly just the highlight areas will be red. Pretty much his entire undersuit is this black color. So I'm just going across to all the different pieces and putting a base coat of black down. And I could use an airbrush, but the problem with the airbrush is I'm not super good at staying within the lines with the airbrush. You know, if I don't have the right tips or anything. So my airbrush has a lot of spread to it, so I would have to tape everything off. And then the problem with taping off is it takes a long time for one, and then once you're done taping off and you peel it off, sometimes the tape will pull up some of the material or some of the paint. So what you would need to do in between that is clear coat it, and then that takes more time. And I figured it would just be a lot quicker and easier for me to go ahead and just paint this all by hand. And you know, that does mean, since I'm thinning down the black paint so much so that it flows well, I'll have to do 2 coats, but I'm not really too worried about that. I'm not too worried because I can be so fast, and I can be a little bit messy with this because this is supposed to be kind of a rough, dirty, grimy character. And also, if I get a little bit of red or black on the ivory, I can just get my brush wet and kind of scrub it off. Or in the case of the black, actually, sometimes if I get some black on the ivory, I'll just get a little bit of wet and rub it in and use it as a wash, because again, I want all the little cracks and the little details brought out as much as possible. So the black would just help that. I can't do that with the red because, you know, that would just look weird, but with the black you can do that. And then here we're back at the airbrush station. I got my skirts completely primed, and now I'm just going in with some red. And it wasn't until later that I realized this red was a lot lighter than the red I ended up using on the rest of the statue, so I do have to end up darkening this up eventually. But yeah, just getting a nice base coat on there. And then here's the sword. Got that primed and got all the gap filler sanded away and smoothed out, so you can go ahead and do a wash on that. And here it comes with the print that was originally blue. You can see in the background the difference between the ivory on that piece versus the other pieces. The other pieces just have a translucent look to them, which is really what I was going for. I don't think this one looks bad. It definitely, if you look at the statue, I don't know if anybody would notice if you know, I didn't mention it, but me knowing what it is, I can definitely tell a difference. Then here I got the skirts I was mentioning, just trying to darken them up a little bit. Still isn't dark enough, especially because on the hood here I painted it all black, forgetting that I wanted the sides to be red, which wasn't a massive deal. I just had to go red over black, which for all of you who know painting isn't the easiest thing to do. It's easier to have a white undercoat if you want a bright color like this. So I ended up doing a couple coats of red, and then it came out really dark, which kind of helped set the tone of red for across the whole statue. So here across everything I'm doing, I got this really light red, and I'm gonna have to go back across all of it with a darker red, because that is originally what I wanted in my original statue, but just kind of forgot about it, and then having the hood have the black underneath kind of forced me into it and helped me remember anyway. And if any of you watching this video paint statues or do anything like this, I would love to hear about it. I had the hardest time trying to paint and show the camera what I was doing, especially because it's a big DSLR camera, so it's in the way, and I had it on a tripod, and it just made it hard to paint this with the camera in the way, and also, you know, trying to show the camera what I was doing. So if any of you out there do anything like this, then yeah, hit me up in the comments, let me know if you got any tricks or anything. And here we are back with the sword, and the sword is got a hand attached to it, and that's just because this hand is wrapped completely around the sword. So printing the hand and the sword separately, I just couldn't imagine a possible way for me to be able to print them separately and then weave the sword into the hand without breaking some fingers or something. And also, even if I did do that, I would eventually put the sword into the hand and then glue it in place anyway, so there's really no purpose to be able to print those separately, unless I, you know, wanted removable hands or something. Then I could have 2 separate hands or 2 separate swords or something like that, but that's not what I was going for at all. So that's why the hand and the sword are printed as one piece, because in the end everything's going to be glued together anyway, so you wouldn't really be able to tell. And then hopefully with these close-ups, whenever they are in focus, helps you show a little bit more of the detail in the statue, at least the detail that I was seeing as I was painting it, because I noticed that going through this video, there's a lot of little details that go unmissed because you can't really tell what's going on, especially when it's that translucent yellow and white. Before I really start to add any of the washes or anything over it, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on with a lot of the pieces. And here I'm just adding more red onto the different pieces, and this is when I'm starting to realize I need to go darker. So this is a little bit of a darker red than I did on the rest of the ivory pieces, but it still ends up not being quite dark enough, so I ended up darkening this. But this one was close enough that all I had to do was add a strong tone wash on top of it, and that really helped darken it up. And the washes are just so great because they helps everything blend together. And you know, if that's what you're going for, sometimes it's not, but in this case that's what I was going for, and it really helped everything blend together and look like one piece. And again, any weird fuzzy lines that I was painting on, anything imperfect, it helped cover a lot of those gaps. And if you're doing washes, however, because they're so wet, that sometimes if you paint a wash over pre-existing paint that isn't sealed or completely cured, sometimes the wetness of the wash can kind of interrupt that and make it bleed a little bit. So when I go ahead and do a wash over all this, and I made sure to do a matte clear coat in between, just to make sure that any of the red doesn't bleed over onto the different parts of the ivory that I don't necessarily want it. And one thing I do is I always do a matte clear coat, and I don't know if that's just because of the gloss clear coat that I have is not the best, but every time I do a gloss clear coat, it almost starts to act like glass, and the paint just flows right off it. It doesn't really stick like it should, or like I want it to. And yeah, I don't know if that's just because it's the type of gloss coat that I have, but I prefer to use matte in between. And then if there's something that I want to be shiny or glossy afterwards, then I can go hand paint some gloss varnish on top of that to make it look a little bit glossy. But as far as the painting process goes, I generally stick to matte. And I like to think throughout the process of making this video, my camera skills got better, and more of these shots are in focus. But one thing that's a struggle as well is the camera screen is like an inch or an inch and a half tall, so it's hard to tell on that screen what's actually in focus and what's not. So, you know, regardless, I think this is definitely better than an iPhone, which is what I used for the video a couple months ago of the water alien sculpture that I was talking about that inspired this whole piece. I definitely think it's better than that video quality wise, but there's definitely still things I can get better at. And at this point, I'm just really trying to go across all the different pieces, and you know, I started off with that soft tone, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill in all the black and all the red. I'm really not worried about adding shadows or different highlights or variations of color. I'm really just trying to block things in and fill it in, because again, I'll do the strong tone over all of it, which will help blend it all together and add shadows, and then I can dry brush on top of that to add any highlights where I want. So this part it's long and tedious because there's a lot of red and a lot of weird spots that kind of make it a struggle to get the paint in where I want it. But really, I'm just trying to basically draw within the lines right now, just fill color in. Having this black underneath it does definitely make it more of a struggle to get your color down. You can see the difference between the hood and the little kerchief or whatever coming down out of his mouth. The red is just so much stronger because it was a white primer base. And here I'm starting to go in and realize I want it darker, so mix a little bit of black with the red. And I'm not being super careful this time. I'm going a lot quicker, just trying to block in the color. And again, any of the gaps I'm not too worried about right now because of the strong tone that I will eventually be going across it with. But yeah, just trying to make sure I have a good base color across every piece. And the black is thin and flows well, so sometimes that'll need a second coat, or you know, if it gets scratched or anything just in the process of painting, just fixing everything up. This piece as well, just I basically went across with a big brush to fill in most areas with the black, and now I'm just coming in with my small detail brush against where the cloth meets the ivory, because I don't want to get too much black on the ivory or anything like that. And same here, just filling in the cloth that would go over his wrist. And one thing I try to do is not have too much paint on the joints that connect together. Like you can see on the bottom of his head here and there. He has a little square peg that will glue into the top of the torso piece, so I don't really want to get paint on that because I'll just have to scrape it off later when I go to glue these pieces together. And if it's really thin, sometimes it won't matter as long as you have enough fresh material, but if you have too much paint on there, the glue is going to stick to the paint, and if the paint isn't holding on good because there's not enough primer or anything like that, then the pieces just aren't going to stick together well. So I try not to get too much paint on any of those pieces as much as possible. And now here you can see I'm finally moving on to the strong tone I was mentioning, and again, this is a much darker color. It's more of a black. I mean, if you thin it out, it does look a little brown, but if you have it in big pools, it looks a lot more black. So I don't want to go crazy with the strong tone. The soft tone was more just to get the nice color and kind of variation of different colors across the whole body for the ivory. But the strong tone I'm using more as a traditional wash in this case, where I want it to settle in the cracks and really help highlight different areas. So if there's a part on his body, like his torso for example, the armors kind of twist together, so there's certain parts where they connect together that I really try to go heavy with this strong tone to help imply shadows or different things like that. And if there's any big cracks or anything like that, I really try and get a good amount of strong tone in there and just let it dry and cure solids to keep that nice dark color. But I also will still go in with a paper towel and wipe off the strong tone from the top of everything, because again, I don't want this whole piece to be that dark black. I just want that in the cracks. And if you let it paint it on there and let it sit for a while, it'll kind of dry and cure a little bit, and then you take your paper towel and just wipe it off the top, because you know, if you want the color to be shadow, it's not going to be on the top anyway. So you wipe it off, and it just takes the strong tone off the tips and all the highlight areas basically, and really helps that piece pop. And then what I'm doing here is the dry brush technique that I was talking about, and just get a little bit of white and brush 99% of it off, so there's just a tiny bit of white paint in the tips of your brush. And it's called dry because you don't add any water, you don't add anything, you want it to be as dry as possible. And then you go across the piece and just lightly brush it on, and since it's so dry and there's so little paint, it'll really just stick white paint to the tips, to the highest points. Like I was talking about how you wipe the strong tone off and it'll take it off the tops, the white dry brushing does the opposite, where it adds color to the top, and what I want there is this white. And it also just helps make these pieces pop a little bit more. And it doesn't just have to be white dry brushing. You can see here I'm doing this really light, almost light red, almost pink color to highlight some of the different red textures across the piece as well. This next process is actually one of my favorite parts. This paint is called Molitor Chrome, and it's basically what it sounds like. It's a chrome paint, but it's the best chrome paint that I've ever used. It really works well, and it generally comes in markers for using for, like, you know, drawing and things like that. But you can buy these little refill containers and just use it like regular paint, and it works so well. As long as you get you don't go too thick with it, but you don't go too thin, you can paint it on there, and it really, you can see just throughout this video, it's nice and reflective, and it really works well. It makes it look like it is real metal in your piece. And now I'm getting to the part of gluing everything together. I'm getting really happy with the way this whole paint job's working, so I'm just gluing it together. And what I have here is just super glue, and this other stuff that looks like just water I'm dipping on there. It's called Accelerator. It just makes there's some sort of chemical reaction, and it cures the super glue almost instantly. And it actually works really well using super glue, because the way I designed it with these pegs, they already slot together really well and kind of hold themselves in position for the most part. So the super glue just adds a little bit more to that and helps it hold together really well. The only thing that the super glue doesn't do well is holding the piece to the base, but we'll talk about that when we get there. And you can see there is some paint on these joint pieces, but I try to make sure they're where most of it is connecting, there's no paint, because I want to have a good strong connection between resin pieces. And I do leave a little bit of paint there to fill in any gaps, so I don't want you to be able to see any, I don't want you to be able to see any pieces that haven't been painted in between or anything like that. So I do try and paint as close as possible to the joint, but still leave a little bit of free, fresh resin to be glued together. And you can see here that everything's looking really good. Doing one more strong tone across the pieces, kind of around some of the metal, the chrome areas that I painted, or any cracks that I missed. And I'm gonna actually have to go in and airbrush on his skirts on the front and back to darken those up, because they're just looking, even after I did some washes on them, they're just way too bright. But other than that, this is actually looking really, really good. So yeah, like I said, just gotta do a little bit on the skirts and maybe a little light dry brushing on the other pieces. But here's the base I made. I did design one in ZBrush, so if you've seen the video where I actually sculpted this, I had a different base, but I didn't really like it, so I went out to my shed and milled up this little piece of walnut. And basically what I'm going to do is just transfer the pegs from his foot over to the walnut, and then machine those holes out and glue them on there. Alright guys, and here's the finished piece. I'm super happy with it. Just absolutely love the way it turned out. I definitely think it's the best piece I've ever done as far as sculpting, as far as painting. It looks the best. There's a few touch-up areas I could do here, but overall I'm super happy with it. This guy is actually up on my Etsy, so if any of you are interested in buying something like this, then check out my Etsy, link in the bio. I just want to say thanks so much for watching. Anybody that's willing to like, comment, subscribe, it helps me out a ton, and I super appreciate it. But also I just wanted to bring up that I know last week I didn't put out a video, and I try to put out a video every week, but unfortunately I had some things happen, so I can't spend as much time on working on these videos. So for the foreseeable future, I'm probably going to start doing a video every 2 weeks, or just kind of when the video's done, then I'll put it out. And I'll try and do it at least every 2 weeks, and maybe once in a while I'll still put one out every week. But just wanted to let you guys know, and really wanted to say thanks so much to all my subscribers, all my viewers. I appreciate it so much. I want to say thank you to all 329 subscribers that I have right now. It's my goal to try and make a career out of YouTube, and you guys are definitely helping that, so thank you again. And I will see you on the next episode.